Hi, Mandy.
Hey,
How are you doing?
good. How are you?
Good, good. Shay should be on in just a sec here.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks so much for doing the talk. I'm really excited to hear what you have.
No problem. Can I just make sure my slide's gonna share we're good here?
Definitely. Yep. Yep. I might have to give you. Oh no, it's working. Yep.
Look all right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm gonna make both of you guys hosts just in case anything happens.
Hey, Mandy,
Hey.
how's it going?
Hey. Yeah, just one sec here.
Is it okay with you, Mandy, that we're recording?
Yeah, sorry, Mandy shared that was okay. And then we were talking like 2 minutes ago, and I forgot to mention that to you, Zara.
Well, I will leave it recording then.
There's people starting to come into the waiting room. You give me the green light when you're ready, Mandy. I was just gonna start off with like a very brief introduction, and then like the floor is yours. And then when it goes back to questions, do my best to like field people that are asking questions, and encourage them to use the chat too, and we'll keep an eye on that. But anything else you needed from us?
Nope. Sounds good.
Awesome. Okay. And
I'm
start.
gonna have to hop off halfway through, Mandy. I'm sorry, but I'm gonna
Okay.
put the other half on the recording.
Okay. Welcome everybody that's just kind of joining into the room here. We're just gonna give it a couple minutes before we get started. And yeah, just let people figure out where their links are and get logged in here, and we'll get going. I'm always a big fan of finding where people are calling in from as well. So feel free to use the chat to share where you're coming from today. So be interesting to get a snapshot of just how vast the geography is. Because right now I know it released from BC to the territories to Churchill, Manitoba. So uh, yeah, we're quite a catchment already. Okay, for those, I don't know if I said this when everyone that's on here now, we're just gonna hold on for we'll say a minute and a half more, and then we'll see where we're at, and we're gonna get started from there. So. Zara, did you start the recording?
The recording's going. Yep.
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I say we get started here. People are going to continue to roll in, I'm sure. But just for the sake of whatever time zone you're in and how much time you had set aside to join us today, want to respect that time. Welcome to October. I almost said November, but I guess we're pretty close. But October's virtual learning circle. My name's Shay Henderson. I work with Nature United as their coordinator for the Youth on the Land Opportunities community, and I'm joined by Zara. I don't know if she's on the top left of your screen, but she's on the top left of mine. And then Dr. Mandee McDonald on the right-hand side of my screen. But maybe just Zara and Mandee, if you can wave, just so people know who you are on the screen. So thanks for joining today. Really excited that we have someone at least that I've come across many times in my own master's research. And I just I've quoted Dr. McDonald quite a bit in my own work, so I really enjoy reading her work and all the research that they've been doing and her neck of the woods. So I'm going to do a brief introduction about Dr. McDonald, and then we're going to dive right into it. And she has a presentation to share with us today. I'll let you do a more deep dive of your introduction, Mandee. But so Mandee originally comes from Churchill, which is where I'm calling in from currently. But I think lived most of her life up in Yellowknife. She is a multifaceted individual, from high tanning to facilitating workshops and professional development like this. And obviously, if you've read her piece through the Yellowhead Institute, she's a researcher and published writer as well. Like I said, I first came across Mandee's work through my own research, and then we had the happy accident of crossing paths one time in a gift shop here in Churchill. And I'm just fascinated by all the things that I've come across in my path, both academically and just fun reading on the side. So today, Dr. McDonald is going to share a little bit, as much as she can, in the time we have today, about the special report that was shared out to the network not too long ago. And I'm sure dive into a bit more about around Indigenous land-based education in theory and practice, and potentially how those connections can be made to our own practice wherever we're calling in from today. So just before I pass it off to Mandee, I'll just kind of remind everybody, if you haven't yet, throw in to the chat where you're coming from today. And then we will have time for questions at the end. So hold your questions, but also feel free to put them into the chat as a written reminder so we can come back to them afterwards. So with no further wait, I'll pass it off to you, Mandee.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me to speak to you today. Can everyone hear me all right? Okay, great. I'm just going to share my screen for my little PowerPoint. Can everyone see that all right? Oops.
Looks good on my end.
Thanks. All right. Yeah, thanks again. I recognize some names in the meeting here, so that's fun. Like Shay said, my name is Mandee McDonald. I am a member of York Factory First Nation, and I was born in Churchill. I lived there till I was about 10, and then have been living in Samba Cay, Denendeh, Yellowknife, Northwest Territories ever since. I'm a high tanner. I am a, well, I just finished my PhD this year from the University of Alberta in the Faculty of Native Studies. And yeah, well, I'll say more about me in a little bit, but I'm here today to talk a bit about the special report, which I wrote in 2022, and it was published by the Yellowhead Institute in 2023. This one here. I actually started writing that paper in 2021 for the Northwest Territories Recreation and Parks Association. And in the paper early on, maybe on the first page, there's a little acknowledgement of gathering that happened, I think 2019, I don't remember, that brought together a bunch of people who delivered Indigenous land-based programming. And one of the things they identified in that meeting as a need was some kind of research or something that demonstrated the value of Indigenous land-based education and programming so that people who wanted to deliver that type of programming had some kind of tool or resource to use for their fundraising and, program development and advocacy. So that's how the paper came to be. And I reread it yesterday so I could talk about it because I wrote it a long time ago. I feel like it's getting to be a little bit outdated now, but still very relevant. I assume most of you have looked at it, so I'm not going to go through it really in detail, but rather what I want to do is identify some elements from that paper that I think are worth emphasizing today and making some new connections between some of the paper's findings and what's happening today and my current research. So I came to this work through an Indigenous governance lens. I don't have any formal training actually in education. My bachelor's is in political science and my master's in Indigenous studies, and my PhD is in Indigenous studies, and it focused on Indigenous governance, hide tanning, and land-based learning. Um, so yeah, I don't have any formal training in education, and I don't design programs for youth, though youth are always welcome in the programming that I've been a part of delivering. I don't work much with youth, so some of the arguments that I make in some of my work may not directly apply to youth education, but I I still think there's well, the people that do youth education can figure out ways to modify it and make it more age appropriate, I'm sure. But my work mostly focuses on creating safe spaces for Indigenous people and supporting Indigenous people to reconnect to land and community and the teachings and thought systems of their peoples. And since I wrote this paper for that Yellowhead published, I completed my PhD. And my dissertation is called Hide Tanning and Indigenous Governance. It further develops some of the ideas that I offered out in the Yellowhead paper, particularly the end of the paper where I suggest Dr. Eve Tuck's work on Indigenous theories of change could be a promising approach to developing Indigenous land-based programming, evaluation, and frameworks. One of the things I talk about in the paper a little bit is how it hasn't really been possible to do any long-term evaluations of Indigenous land-based programming because they're so poorly resourced that many aren't offered consistently or for a very long time. So it's pretty hard to try to determine the long-term impacts of programming when uh, they don't most of them don't have the resources to be offered very consistently and for uh, years and years. But so this is just a photo of one of the hide camps that I helped deliver through Dene no Wo. Right now, I'm not really well, I don't know if I'm not employed as a academic right now. I have three different jobs. One is with Dene no Wo, which is a Dene Innovation and Arts Collective based in Sambake. I'm the Hide Camp director and the acting managing director, and one of 10 founders of the organization. And Dene no Wo's main programming stream right now is hide tanning. We deliver up to 3 camps a year in partnership with different Indigenous communities or governments, and we try to support other hide tanning initiatives whenever we can. Usually that just looks like applying for grants to send our hide tanning instructors to other people's camps. And our camps are usually 2 weeks long. We do a hide tanning mentorship program. We have a staff kind of development camp where we train new hide tanning instructors to work with our systems. And then we just recently started doing a winter frost scraping camp because all of our spring, summer, and fall programs were being canceled because of the wildfires and the air quality up here. I'm also faculty at Dechinta Center for Research and Learning. Their head office is here in Sambake, and they deliver land-based courses which are accredited by the University of British Columbia. And Dechinta does run children's programming. They have a children's program called the Godzea program. So students in the university course can bring their kids with them, and they have really good programming for them there. I'm also a sessional instructor currently at the University of Victoria in the Indigenous Governance program. And then, as Shay mentioned, I am a consultant and I do facilitation, um, land-based program design, and research and strategic planning. I'm also 7 months pregnant right now, and I get really out of breath when I'm talking for a long time. So I just need a little drink of water. And this hide camp this photo here on my slide deck is from one of Dene Nowo's hide tanning mentorship programs, which we delivered in partnership with Lidley First Nation and Decho First Nation. I think this was in 2019 or 2020. I don't remember, but we went through a time where our camps kept getting canceled because of COVID and then forest fires. And this year, May 2025, was the first time we were able to deliver a full 2-week hide tanning mentorship program, which we delivered in partnership with Yellowknife's Dene First Nation here in Yellowknife. So I know there's tons of different kinds of place-based programs, outdoor education programs, land-based programs going on all over the country. And they'll all have different goals and intended outcomes. For me, most of the Indigenous-led land-based programming I'm familiar with, the goals are ultimately to advance Indigenous self-determination, however those programs may define what that means. A lot of programs are specifically for youth, some adults, some elders, some are clinical or therapeutic, and they'll have a variety of stated goals, which I think more often than not align with the ultimate goal of advancing Indigenous self-determination. They do that in all kinds of different ways. And even the term Indigenous self-determination is not something that everyone defines in the same way academically, in government, in healthcare, in different communities. But in Indigenous studies and Indigenous governance as academic fields, there's kind of two main definitions out there. The main one is Indigenous self-determination is Indigenous peoples as nations or collectives having the capacity to determine their own lives informed by their own thought systems and worldviews. And then kind of a newer perspective on Indigenous self-determination is a Indigenous feminist intervention that was offered by a Sami scholar named Dr. Rauna Kuokkanen. And she has a really amazing book that is called Restructuring Relations. And in it, she argues that Indigenous self-determination should be understood as a value that supports or ensures integrity, the integrity of the land and personal bodily integrity. And this is a specifically anti-violent definition of self-determination that is less commonly referenced in land-based programming and education, but is catching on more and more, especially um, in situations or programs that employ an Indigenous feminist approach or analysis to their programming. But in any case, both definitions necessitate a connection to land. So this is where land-based programming is really very impactful. So the pathway to Indigenous self-determination includes a whole bunch of different programmatic goals that I list in the Yellowhead paper, starting from very individual impacts on youth, like increased self-esteem or cultural competence, um, increased relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous participants and learners, increased cultural pride and confidence on the land, stronger felt connections to land and community, intergenerational relationships. Um, I think importantly, what I didn't say in the Yellowhead paper is one of the really powerful things that land-based education does and has been doing is normalizing Indigenous elders and knowledge holders as and recognizing them as holders of vitally important knowledge. And then many programs, which more for older youth and adults and elders, focus on critical education on topics like settler colonialism and systemic violence, capitalism, climate justice, and reconciliation. And in the report, I touch on the potential for land-based programs to be sites of climate action and reconciliation between Indigenous peoples and settlers, newcomers, arrivants of color, and non-Indigenous people, which I still strongly think is true. I also discuss in the paper the rise of Indigenous Guardians programs as an overtly political form of Indigenous land-based programming. And that's an area that I've been thinking more about, and some of my facilitation work has brought me into some of these guardian spaces as well. And that's a bit more where my mind is at with things these days. This is just a screenshot I took from the Indigenous Guardians Toolkit website, and it's a image of probably not all the Indigenous Guardian programs happening in Canada, but most of them. There's quite a few in the Northwest Territories that I'm familiar with, and a few in Manitoba as well. And Indigenous Guardians programs are political. Well, Indigenous Guardian programs are programs run by Indigenous nations where they take people out on the land. They do a variety of different tasks related to monitoring and conserving. So some of them will monitor changes due to climate change, water levels, water quality, uh, wind, um, count wildlife, or they'll monitor for industrial activity, contamination, spills, or tourism activity, hunting, and things like that. They're very diverse in the types of work that they do, the resources that they can access, and the capacity that they have for other things like advocating at more policy level for different things, or um, yeah, that kind of thing. So, and they're political because they're part of Indigenous nations' efforts to protect their traditional territories against industrial contamination and settler encroachment, monitoring for climate change effects, and improving food security for their communities by harvesting country foods and distributing it. Often, these efforts include work to establish Indigenous protected areas, or to collect data to have their Aboriginal title legally recognized. And these efforts are often met with fear and resistance by non-Indigenous Canadians who have significant influence over the outcomes of these processes. And I think this is an area where people who deliver land-based programming for multicultural contexts can have a long-term influence. And by that I mean, uh, land-based programming, land-based programs can be sites where people's perceptions of these things are changed. So people's perceptions of guardian programs, of stewardship and Indigenous protected areas and Indigenous peoples more broadly can be changed for the better. All right, so near the end of that paper, the Yellowhead paper, I talk about a little bit about Indigenous theories of change. And ultimately, I think Indigenous land-based programming is a method for regenerating Indigenous thought systems by facilitating opportunities for people to reconnect to and learn from the land under the guidance and teachings of elders from the area and other knowledge holders. That is ultimately my interest in land-based programming. Regenerating Indigenous thought systems, governance systems, and lifeways are vital elements of furthering Indigenous self-determination and affecting transformation. And land-based programming can play a very big role in this. So, as I said, since I wrote that paper, I finished my PhD, and my dissertation is called High Tanning and Indigenous Governance. In my research project, I picked up on, basically picked up where I left off at the end of the Yellowhead paper, where I suggest looking closer at Dr. Eve's Tuck approach to Indigenous theories of change and evaluation. And one of the findings from my dissertation is what we are calling the High Tanner's theory of social transformation, which emerged from the interview analysis that I did. So for my project, I did a few things, but one of my methods was I interviewed 6 Indigenous women high tanners who organize and deliver high tanning programming. And I asked them about the governance principles that inform their work. They talked about the impacts that high tanning camps have been having on their communities. They talked about relationships between high tanners and hunters in the community being strengthened. They talked about hunters bringing more hides back with them when they go hunting, bringing back more leg bones and parts of the moose and the caribou that hide tanners need to tan the hides. They talked about the different protocols that are taught in a hide camp and the different teachings that are taught in a hide camp. And so the hide tanner's theory of social transformation positions hide tanning as a vantage point from which love, connection, and the future come into view and within reach. In other words, hide tanning furthers understandings and praxis of love, connection, and the future from within the Indigenous thought systems and communities of the people who participate in and lead the hide camps. Like I said, this theory or my approach to kind of developing it was inspired by Dr. Eve Tuck's work on Indigenous theories of change, but it's a little bit different from what she wrote about. And, the next step of this research, I think, is to present it to more hide tanners because I interviewed 6 women and then I presented this theory back to them a number of times before I finalized my dissertation paper. And I was able to develop this theory partly because the hide tanning camps have been happening consistently since 2014. So there's years of data to review and lived experiences for the interviewees to reflect upon, which I think is pretty unique for Indigenous land-based programming because, like I said at the beginning, most programs that I know about um, are not able to be offered very consistently or for very long due to funding and other restrictions. The hide tanning programming, I wouldn't say is just one program delivered by one organization, but kind of a constellation of different hide tanning initiatives that different organizations or different groups have been delivering. So that includes Wo's hide tanning programming, which started in 2014 and has been delivered pretty consistently ever since then, except for some of the interruptions I mentioned due to COVID and wildfires. The Let's OK First Nations women's group have been also organizing a community hide camp since 2014 that's open to everybody to attend, including people from outside the community, and many people do from all over the place. And then one of the other hide tanners that I interviewed has been delivering a hide camp in her community pretty consistently for maybe the past 5 years. Actually, two of the women I interviewed have been delivering hide tanning programming separately in their own regions. So that's what I have prepared for you today. And I know there's a lot from the Yellowhead paper that I didn't talk about, but I'm happy to answer any questions that people may have or any questions about my presentation.
Amazing. Thank you. Thanks, Mandee. I definitely have a question or two, but what we'll do is open it up to the group. You can either unmute yourself, maybe put the hand up if you know where that function is on your Zoom account. But if you want to ask a question, either unmute or just put it in the chat and I can read it out for you. Go ahead, Michelle.
Hi there. Thank you for the presentation. My name is Michelle Edwards. I work with the Statliam Chiefs Council. I'm a former chief of 12 years, but I've always worked in natural resource management with leadership and really looking at land-based education, but taking knowledge from my elders of really working with young people, probably for a couple of weeks, and really talking about our history, how healthy the land was, some of the impacts that happened to the land. So when they're out there on the land and you're starting to teach them things like, how we used hides, because, I think, in my community years ago before settlement, we would have had to been hunting hundreds and thousands of deer just to clothe, some of the community, because we had about 100,000 people here. So that kind of, you got to start really filling them with that kind of knowledge on what we had compared to what they're going to start seeing out there. So they start thinking about what we're going to have to do in the future to be restoring the land and getting these numbers up, the connectivity that these animals needed and how they provided for us, and just really that connection and that respect, so they really understand when they start working the hide, just the stories that come with that, and all the stories that have been in the DNA of especially the animals that have been on the land for thousands of years providing for us. So I just wondered if that was something that when you're doing that, when you're in camp, if you bring the elders to really talk about our great history and our connection to the land and the animals and the water, and even with each other, the nation to nation connection that we had as well, that comes with how we developed an economic base, our trade networks and things like that, because that's how far I want to go with land-based education. But obviously, there's all the pieces that fit into that. But I like looking at the big picture of really teaching our young ones who their ancestors were, and so they have a good knowledge of that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, so there's two ways that I have facilitated those types of learnings, and for example, in the Deninawo hide camps, so those ones are not accredited programming. They're typically open community camps, and usually anyone is welcome to come. We partner with a different Indigenous community or organization for 2 years in a row and work with them to figure out what their goals are for the camp. Sometimes the camps will just be for their community members and it'll be by registration only. And sometimes they want it open to everyone in town. We have a huge, like, hide tanning, ginormous festival type thing. Um, but what's worked best with those hide tanning camps is, well, one, we always hire elders from the local community to help with the hide tanning, share teachings. Our Deninawo hide tanning staff are kind of like the muscle. We know how to tan hides. We're not experts. We can do a lot of the steps, and we work with the elders from the community who know how to tan hides, but physically can't really do the labor of it anymore. So we work with them to facilitate those teachings between the elders or other knowledge holders and the other participants. As for the teachings about like history and the protocols and the values and things like that, what we found works best in those camps is to just make sure there's space and time for people to connect and talk. We don't have it structured so that it's this elder's turn to do like a 40-minute talk about the history and protocols of high tanning in the area or anything like that. We found that hasn't worked very well for us in the past, but we have the knowledge holders hired. We have tons of food, tons of areas to sit and hang out, because at a camp, like 80% of high tanning is cleaning and waiting and picking wood and all that stuff. And during those times, those are really great opportunities for the participants and the knowledge holders to talk and share. And we've found that the knowledge transmission has been really powerful in that way, in those settings. And it happens like a little bit more organically. Because sometimes people are working really hard on their hides, like, and then they take a break and do something else, work with the knowledge holders on something else. We found that trying to get everybody in a circle for someone to share a teaching just hasn't worked well in a camp setting. But in Dechinta, uh, that is like those are university accredited programs. It's quite a bit more structured in that sense. So we would have knowledge holders do a talk or a presentation on a specific topic, like the topics that you mentioned. Or we have other instructors, like university professors, that can teach about other aspects of history, not necessarily the world views and protocols and values piece, but the history of colonization in the area and legislation and policy and that type of thing. So that's how I've gone about it in two different ways, and I find both very effective depending on the learners. Because learners, there's all different ways of learning and different approaches that work better for people. Some really do well and prefer the sit down, listening, take notes type structure, and some prefer a more kind of fluid, hands-on, casual knowledge sharing type approach.
There's a couple questions in the chat there, Mandy. The first one is pretty straightforward. How do we access your PhD dissertation if you're willing to share?
You can't access it yet. I put an embargo on it because I'm trying to write a book, and I was told that it's best to not share the dissertation publicly until you have a contract with a publisher. But so yeah, sorry, Jean. I could send it to you though.
We'll hold tight. We won't. Yeah, we'll sit in our chairs patiently waiting to read it for sure. Um, There's another question here from Mika, if I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. Is there any content or resources for youth on hide tanning that could be used in other communities? Their context looks like Northern Saskatchewan. And the second question that they shared is how does your training with moose and caribou hides tie into the toolkit if it does for Indigenous guardians, or are they two separate programs?
Yeah. So for the content and resources for youth on high tanning, I don't have anything there's lots on the internet, like YouTube videos and different books, like self-published booklets and stuff that you can print. I haven't created anything like that, and Dene Nowo hasn't, and the Chinta hasn't. For me, my thinking around that is that really the most valuable lessons of hide tanning come from the relationships between people and the land that it activates. So I haven't been interested in creating content about the technical steps of tanning the hide. There's a quite a bit on there on the internet right now, nothing that I have looked closely into and feel comfortable recommending. But our approach has been like the lessons are in the relationships and the sharing that happens between people and the experiences that people have on the land. Hide tanning, learning like tanning an actual hide is not even really the primary goal of a hide camp when we run a hide camp. The primary goal is to support people to feel connected to the land and each other and the hides and the animals, and we'll work on it as kind of weather permits. I mean, high tanning is all dependent on the weather as well and being able to access certain things from the land and stuff like that. So, in terms of content and resources like that, I don't really have much to offer, but looking for some teacher in Northern Saskatchewan. There are high tanners I know of in that area. And what Dene No Wo can do it if people are interested is, if someone is interested in having one of our high tanners come teach, we can apply for a travel grant or something like that to help bring them there and support. And then your other question, does the moose hide training connect with the Guardians programs? Yes and no. Like, one thing we're working on right now at Dene Nowo in partnership with the Caribou Guardians Coalition here is a project we're doing in February or March, where we're bringing together Caribou Guardians and high tanners. Sorry, just breathe for a second. We're bringing together Caribou Guardians and hide tanners to talk about the different ways in which hide tanners can and do support caribou conservation and strengthen relationships between humans and caribou. Well, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the situation with the caribou herds. They're in decline very badly, and there's a lot of issues with hunting and things like that up north. So this is a new project that we're doing with the Caribou Guardians from across the Northwest Territories. And our first gathering is in March, and we'll kind of see what comes out of it from there.
Awesome. Thanks for that. I did put in the chat there. I don't know them personally, but Dr. Kevin Lewis, I believe, does some work around hide tanning
Oh yeah.
in Saskatchewan, and he has a camp that they operate in that neck of the woods, and it's really focused. There's some of the camps focus on giving adults kind of like foundational training. Um, yeah. Uh, any other questions that folks wanted to ask? Or comments, doesn't have to be questions. Oh, go ahead, Jerry.
Hello. I just would like to ask in regards to um, speaking about the living up here in the NWT, we do have some land-based programs, but they aren't, like Mandee said, they aren't consistent and an everyday thing. So here in Littaquay, especially our elementary school, um, it's our children are suffering, and there's been a lot of issues over. I've been in the community for 5 years, and I've watched the impact on our community, on our children, and it's just yeah, doesn't seem like an issue that is very yeah. In my instance, I run a day home, and I try to incorporate land-based little like play groups or outdoor play groups. Going out and harvesting in the fall is the best time. We have a little camp on the highway, which I invite those that can join to come. And then I've brought bush kids here to, I'm just speaking, just give me a sec. I brought bush kids here to facilitate their 3-day workshop to encourage the forest educators program that they can facilitate. And I think it would be an amazing investment in our community members and our community to offer that program. So we're getting there. And what I hope to see is that, you know, I keep being told to bring it to the DEA and bring it to the education board, but because there's so many issues already with the school that we have that they're, you know, responsible for, I just don't see them prioritizing it being done in their way. And I just think it's something our community needs to do on our own, and finding those sources of income and gathering and being a collective initiative, like a grassroots program. So what would you, any advice or any resources that you could share to help make this like an actual reality for our communities, a little land school that is aligned with our traditions and our community?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think starting small is really important to like starting small, I think is effective. And where I've seen land-based programming for youth and adults really be successful is in kind of like the nonprofit sort of sector. So I have found that schools really struggle with the limited resources they have to incorporate land-based programming in addition to all the like educational requirements that they have to follow already. I found Indigenous governments, smaller ones, struggle to prioritize land-based programming because they have so many other pressing, urgent issues to prioritize. I have found like territorial governments don't, and so the places where land-based programming has been delivered successfully usually starts with a group of people in the community unaffiliated with an organization, but then they need to partner with someone like an administrative host or create a nonprofit in order to apply for funding. So my recommendation would be to like have a crew. So if there's a small crew you've been working with and you have an idea, reach out to a nonprofit that may be able to serve as administrative host, and you can apply for funding through the example of the On the Land Collaborative. They have a grant open right now, and I think the deadline's next week. So you could apply for a small pilot to bring the Bush Kids up there, or Bush Kids also offers training so you can learn to deliver their curriculum in your community as well.
Yeah, we had them here last May, and we had the initial 3-day workshop to intro that to the community. So now it's the next step would be follow up and see who's interested in their 1-year program that they could offer,
Yeah.
which would be amazing because any community member can take it. And I know there's a lot of our schools ran pretty much by like subs, which are community members. And, you know, if we're at that point, I think that's what would be a really good investment for our community, working with them.
Yeah. Like, yeah, that sounds good. Unfortunately, I think a lot of getting land-based programming up and running, I think falls to community members outside of these established institutions. It's can be quite a lot of work in the beginning. So starting small and then building up over time based on the feedback from the participants and your experiences as organizers or helpers is the one of the only ways to do it, really.
Yeah, I agree. I think the energy that's going to be put in trying to like fix the issue we're having in our communities with our school, we just take that energy and put it into that, really creating something of our own and much more, yeah, just aligned, because it's just not.
Yeah, but I'm happy to talk more, Jerry, if you want to
I would
message
love
me
to.
later. Mhm.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
And congrats.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jerry. I also the link to the NWT Collaborative on the Land is in there, and also Indigenous Youth Roots has a grant open right now for budding land-based programs around land and food sovereignty. I don't know if you've come across that yet. There, both those links are in the chat. I think we have time for one more question. Mandy, are you good with that?
Yep.
Yeah, and I don't know who it is from the Aquila Society, but go for it.
Yeah,
I hope that's that. Can you? Oh, you know each other apparently.
I'm Jules. I'm with Aquila. Thanks for the presentation, Mandy. It was awesome. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about what evaluation mechanisms you have used for the hide camps you've run, like with our programs. Kind of our only evaluation mechanism is to survey participants, and sometimes community, if and they're like the participants guardians if we have the capacity, or if they want to fill out a survey, which
Mhm.
is hard to get people to do sometimes. So just wondering if you have some other kind of evaluation mechanisms that you have found has worked and has given you kind of like that data that funders want as well.
Yeah. So like I don't know if I don't remember if I include all the evaluation stuff in the Yellowhead paper, but I have a chapter in my dissertation more specifically about evaluation. And then like there's two types of evaluation. There's what you need to produce for your funders to continue to get money. And then there's the type of evaluation that is designed by the organization or the community to really try and assess the impacts of the program according to what the actual goals of the program are. And what the actual goals of the program are may not always be the programs you identify, the goals you identify in your funding applications, right? I know we're all kind of like strategic with how we write our funding applications, and the goals of the actual program may be quite different. And we do want to assess those because we want to be able to tell our communities and participants how we're measuring up in terms of those. So for Dene Nowo, for example, when I first started my PhD, I wanted to do a formal evaluation of Dene Nowo's high tanning initiatives. But I found that I changed my mind. I didn't think that would be a good use of my time anymore. But I also found that a lot of the high tanners who participate in Dene Nowo's programs are also participating in lots of other types of programs as well. So you couldn't really say whatever the impacts are of high tanning, they're not necessarily all because of Dene Nowo, and I didn't want to try and like have Dene Nowo be looking like we're trying to take credit for everything when there's a lot of different initiatives going on. But what I did find for Dene Nowo, we do surveys, but when you fill out a survey, your name goes into a draw to win a Pendleton blanket. So everyone wants to fill one out, and we get a lot of responses. We also do participant observation, I guess it's called. So the staff debrief regularly throughout the program, and we do a long debrief at the end where the staff can say, oh, I heard this, I talked to this person about this was my experience, and we kind of document that all in a report for ourselves. And what I was able to do with my dissertation that I think is really effective as well is what's, I think, called an impact evaluation. So I actually had an hour to 2 hour interviews with people to talk about the impacts of the program that they're feeling and that they're witnessing in their communities. And I found that to be really effective, also quite time consuming. So not something you can really do every year, but interviewing people, especially people who haven't been involved in the program for a number of years, and then analyzing their responses to make some like claims about how the program is doing. And then for the funders, that piece, it's actually so easy to report back to funders because it's just numbers, really, like how many people and da 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 da. But I know that the funding that's available for land-based programming is usually quite small. So it's like reporting on $5,000, whatever. Reporting on 10,000, ooh, $10,000 grant, yay. That's like a little bit better. But for those multi-year grants, that's where your evaluation probably needs to be a bit more robust in terms of numbers and dollars and activities and things like that. And really what I think is needed is more research maybe, or someone needs to write more about the impacts of these programs on like a wider scale, something that can actually influence the amount of funding that is available for land-based programming. Because I find a lot of people can write the grants and get the grants, but the grants are so small and limited. And what we actually need is more bigger grants and more multi-year funding. And so if we could kind of like work together like regions and pool their data to make broader claims about the positive impacts of this programming, that might be something that can be useful for influencing policies change and how those resources are distributed. But the Pendleton, that'll get people to fill out the forms.
Pendleton mini teepee blankets also get people really excited too. I just had that happen for our own gatherings. So anyways, thanks for the question. And it's getting close to 1 o'clock, which means we're already over what time Mandee gave us more time than I had initially told her about the time frame of this. So appreciate the extra time, Mandy, and all the questions as well. Just want to note that Jenny popped in some resources around evaluation and assessment in the chat. So click on those and open those files up. This is recorded and it will be shared out after the fact, so you should be able to access those links afterwards too. But again, thank you so much, Mandy. Appreciate the insight and the conversation and all the hard work you do. And congrats, 7 months down, and you've got an exciting 2 months ahead of you, I'm sure. So, but thank you for taking the time when you've got lots on your plate. I'm sure you have lots on your plate, so thank you. On that note, we'll follow up with a recording, give a virtual round of applause or hearts or emojis to Mandy, and yeah, we'll have our next virtual learning circle scheduled right now for November 28th. And that will be with Shirley Thompson, who is currently a PhD candidate through U of M, and she'll be talking about land-based pedagogy through the public school system. So probably an interesting pairing for some of the things that Mandy was talking about today and how we can bridge those two worlds. But thank you again, and have a great rest of your week.
Thanks. Thanks, everybody. The recording still on?
I think it is. I'm going to stop it now.